Call to order, the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, July 26, 2018. All managers are present except Manager Shackleton, who's close at hand. Is there any member of the public here who wishes to address the board on a matter that is not on the agenda? See no hands, we'll move to approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
I will be rearranging a bit so that the administrator's report comes ahead of the closed session. We have, as our first item here, introduction of a new staff member, Tom Dietrich. Mr. Wister.
President White, managers, my pleasure tonight to introduce Tom Dietrich to the board as a new permitting manager, and I'm even happy to be helping welcome him back to the district after a 3-year hiatus that he spent over at the city of Minnetonka. He was formerly with us in the permitting department. I think we're really happy to have him back and see what he can do for us in leading the permitting department forward through our rule revisions and streamlining the department and leading staff. So without saying any more, Tom, if you can get a few words.
James. President White, managers, thank you very much for having me here this evening. I'm very happy to be back at Minnehaha Creek Watershed District. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Tom Dietrich. Previously, I was at the city of Minnetonka as their water resources coordinator. Been there since February 2016, and in that time, I really had an opportunity to see just how unique an organization that Minnehaha Creek is. And it didn't take me very long to realize that working in water resources, there's so many different aspects that you can pay attention to, especially on the public side. And being focused as the Watershed District is, it's a really rewarding experience, and it really made me appreciate my time here. And as soon as I saw the opportunity to get back in with the regulatory department and the Watershed District, I had to jump at it. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward on building on the momentum and the evolution of the district. In the last 3 years, it's pretty amazing to me to just see how the organization has grown. And I'm just looking forward to building on that momentum, building on that evolution, and taking the department forward. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have too.
Welcome back.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here.
Manager Loftus.
How did your commute change?
So my commute is now longer by several hundred feet. Looking forward to the additional minute that the light at Williston might introduce.
Great.
Anything else?
Welcome. Thanks.
Glad to have you back, Tom.
Thank you.
That's right.
I should have moved to the other side. Be closer.
There is another information item in our packet, which is an update on the Minnehaha Preserve Boardwalk repairs. And we'll move to the consent agenda, where we have minutes of the July 12th board meeting, approval of check registers, the general checking account, the surety account, and the 325 Lake Road report, and also Resolution 18068, authorization to execute contracts with professional services, government relations, and managed services provider. Resolution 18069, authorization to transfer $17,558.33 from the 325 Lake Road capital account to the 325 Lake Road operations account. And Resolution 18070, authorization to enter into a contract for utility design services for 6 Mile Creek, Halsted Bay. Is there a motion to approve
Motion
the
for
consent
approval.
agenda? Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Two items I want to comment in the President's report. One is that I did attend a meeting with Commissioner McLaughlin and Representative Vedius, along with James Whisker, and he'll be reporting on that further down the agenda of the Administrator's report. And I want to have a discussion about upcoming retreat topics and dates. But I'd also like, in deference to the fact that we have people here from the public, to drop that down before the Administrator's report and talk about it then. Manager Miller, Policy and Planning Committee.
We delved deeply into policy and planning. We had a very well-organized presentation on the policy responsive program development, and that's a work in progress, which it looks like it's going to be a well thought out development of our response to opportunities and to needs that aren't in the master plan. And we also had an update on the draft of the work plan, and we finished on time.
That's a good report, thank you. Metro Mod report, Manager Rodness.
We had a Metro Mod report.
We did that last time, didn't we? Okay, we'll strike that. And I know that Manager Shackleton, you have a report to give.
Yeah, thank you. Last night, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board met and cast a vote associated with the Hiawatha Golf Course, and they appointed a Citizens Advisory Committee last year. The CAC met once and requested clarification of their charge from the park board. And so last night, the question they were asking was, as we're exploring what to do at Hiawatha Golf Course, are we supposed to only consider something other than an 18-hole golf course, or can we consider an 18-hole golf course on this site? Last night, by vote of 6-2, the park board passed a resolution that had a resolving clause that said to charge the CAC to bring forward a solution resulting from the master planning process that includes, at a minimum, a flood-resilient and ecologically driven 9-hole configuration for a golf course on the property. It passed 6-2. The first, President White referenced a meeting that occurred last week. The first two people to speak at the open forum at the park board was County Commissioner Peter McLaughlin and State Representative Gene McGenius. The Commissioner talked about resilience in the form of community resilience and acknowledging the history of who has golfed at that site in the past. Representative McGenius talked about requesting a plan and creating a plan without understanding the hydrology on site. Talked about the need for a USGS analysis of how water flows within the watershed district, and a more clear understanding of how the dam at Grays Bay is operated. And it was having seen the letter that was distributed to us, that was sent by our administrator to Representative McGenius and Commissioner McLaughlin, it was really disheartening to hear what she had to say. There were about 20 some odd people that spoke through the course of the open forum, and multiple people talked about having a USGS analysis of how water is flowing around Lakes Hiawatha and Comus. So I thought that was a very instructive situation. I forwarded the letter. We received an email with the letter attached. I forwarded that to the full Park and Recreation Board, as well as our chair, administrator, and Michael Schroeder, who's their head planner, who's charged with this issue. And got a response back from nobody, but it was sent to the full Park and Rec Board. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton.
I have a question of the executive director. What does USGA have ability to gather information that we don't already have?
Manager Miller managers the United States Geologic Survey, oftentimes consults with local organizations as a federal agency to do more in-depth study. We already partner extensively with the USGS. They run gauging stations for us down at Hiawatha Avenue to monitor the impact of storm flow, base flow, and flow out of the dam. And they've been heavily involved in working with the City of Minneapolis, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, the DNR, the Watershed District Met Council, and others in evaluating high groundwater concerns around Lake Nokomis and Hiawatha. So I think it's the perspective of some that they would bring a level of credibility for people that are skeptical of the science that's already been developed between all the agencies I just listed. I think that's my perspective. People think that they bring a different level of credibility. I don't know that we share that perspective.
If I might just dovetail on that, I was struck by the tone of distrust of the watershed district by people who were speaking.
And our objective is allegedly what, besides providing sound science?
This is the first meeting I did not attend and watched via their live streaming because I knew it was going to become political, and I decided, in consultation with staff and our board president, that it made no sense to be present in the room because of the politics, but it was important to watch, pay attention to what was happening.
So we'll watch as this develops.
Yep.
Are there other events or meetings managers would like to report on? Thank you. Upcoming meeting and event schedule is listed in the agenda. This August 8th, the next Citizens Advisory Committee meeting will be attended by Manager. We'll move to item 10.1, which is permit 18-248, Sanctuary of Oak Ridge Pumpkins.
Thank you.
Ms. Showalter.
Thank you, President White, managers. Presenting first this evening on permit 18248, which is the sanctuary at Oak Ridge in Hopkins. And this permit is before you this evening at the request of members of the public. So I think you know what to expect, but we'll be starting with background, go into rule triggers, and with staff recommendation. So this project is located on Highway 7 in Hopkins, adjacent to the Oak Ridge Country Club and the Eisenhower Community Center. It is barely outside of our hydrologic boundary, so it actually drains to 9 Mile Creek, but it is very close. So we'll take it for now. And on this parcel, the applicant is proposing to subdivide the parcel to construct 4 single-family homes, a private drive, and associated utilities. So the first rule is the erosion control rule, which is triggered because the applicant is proposing both the excavation of more than 50 cubic yards of soil and disturbance of greater than 5,000 square feet. The applicant has provided perimeter control to satisfy through silt fence to satisfy that requirement of the rule, and has provided a rock construction entrance to minimize sediment tracking, and has provided the required inlet protection. Also provided a stabilization plan that includes at least 6 inches of topsoil, and therefore upon satisfaction of the recommended conditions has met the erosion control rule. The next rule is stormwater management, which is triggered because the applicant is proposing the creation of new impervious surface. There are 2 primary requirements of this rule, the first being the abstraction of the first inch of rainfall off of the entire site's impervious surface. The applicant has provided abstraction through tree preservation, tree planting, filtration trenches, and filtration basin in excess of the required cubic feet of abstraction. And the second major requirement is no increase in runoff rates for the 1, 10, and 100-year events. And as shown in the table, they are also reducing runoff rates for all required storm events. So the 2 primary best management practices are a filtration basin, which will be treating the runoff from the roads, driveways, and the front house of the homes, as well as filtration trenches in the rear yards that will capture runoff from the back house of roofs and the backyards before getting to the wetland on the site. So upon satisfaction of the recommended conditions, the applicant's proposal meets the requirements of the stormwater management rule. Next rule is wetland protection. The buffer provision of the rule is triggered whenever the stormwater management rule is triggered and there are wetlands on the property. The property has a large open water wetland that it shares with the Eisenhower Community Center. Its primary function at this point is pretty similar to a stormwater pond given the extent of development around it. And this So this wetland was originally classified as a preserve, which corresponds to a 75-foot buffer width. That is the highest quality ranking that a wetland can have. It was classified as a preserve in the district's functional assessment of wetlands, which was an analysis completed by the district about 15 years ago that involved review of wetlands for quality through a primarily aerial review. The applicant submitted a MinRAM assessment, which is a methodology based on the same methodology used in the FAW, which determined that it was more accurately characterized by a managed to classification. Because of the age of the functional assessment of wetlands and the limitations by being almost entirely based on aerial photo review, it is often the case that applicants are able to submit a MinRAM and change the management class of wetlands. And so this did not come as a tremendous surprise to staff, and staff reviewed the MinRAM assessment and determined that it accurately represented the characteristics of the wetland. So with the 30-foot wetland buffer width requirement, the applicant chose to exercise buffer averaging to allow for better configuration of the buffer with the limited space available. And so they were required to provide 7,710 square feet of buffer, and they provided 8,169 square feet of buffer, which amounts to about a 31-foot average width. The applicants also are proposing some buffer disturbance for the installation of stormwater facilities that need to outlet within the buffer. And so they have submitted a buffer restoration and management maintenance plan as required by the rule, which will ensure that those areas are restored with native vegetation. So upon satisfaction of the recommended conditions, they meet the requirements of the Wetland Protection Rule. So because all of the rule requirements are met, staff recommends approval subject to satisfaction of following conditions. That's the submission of an erosion control supplemental form, maintenance declaration including requirements for the permitting of the single-family homes, financial assurance, avoidance of utilities on the neighboring property, which were discovered a week ago, and therefore we're still working on that plan, and the reimbursement of district costs. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Before proceeding, are there members of the public who'd like to speak to the board concerning this easement? You first, if you'd like, come up to a microphone.
Certainly.
And begin with your name and your address.
Yeah.
Thank you, Madam President and board members. I appeared before you once before, several months back. I'm Dr. Paul Silverstein, and I am a resident at the adjacent condominium, Oak Ridge Place. Oak Ridge Place is a 18-unit condominium that was built approximately 13 years ago, and we're immediately to the east of the proposed development.
Can you
It's
put
hard.
that overhead picture on?
Yeah.
There we go.
Okay.
There you go.
Yeah. Anyhow, we're immediately to the east.
Right here.
And my main reason for being here is Elizabeth has done a very good job, but we've had concerns, and I think she raised some of that at the very end, about drainage into our garage area and into our driveway. We discovered on one of the diagrams that there is flow of water heading northward. There, without my being able to demonstrate, there's kind of a little situation where there's a rise in our road. We call that road, it's a private road, we call it Oak Ridge Place. And the rise occurs, it's hard without my demonstrating exactly where it is. But,
Let's see, I can.
yeah, I don't have a point here.
It's right about here.
Yeah, right about there.
That's the high
Well,
point.
anyhow, there's a possibility, consequently, in a heavy rainstorm, if there is additional flow from the new proposed development, that some of that water might get under our garage door and come into our underground garage. So we just want to be absolutely sure that that is considered. One of our other board members, Marlis Frankman, has met with the city engineer, and I think also met with Eric Migo, I don't know how. Migo, who is your consulting engineer. And he, in general, agreed with her concern. So that's one thing. The other thing is a curbing is going to be laid adjacent to what is a boulder wall. The boulder wall exists at present, but the developer is going to extend it a little bit further and curve it out. And that causes a twofold concern. Number one, according to the consulting engineer, that may further impair some of the drainage. And also, it narrows the driveway by its protrusion into that Oak Ridge Place Road. I have to apologize without my being able to point to this. It's very hard, I'm sure, for you to understand exactly what I'm talking about. But in any event, it does potentially narrow the road somewhat at that particular junction. And Engineer Migo said if that curbing were closer to the boulder wall, it would actually facilitate drainage out of that area and down to the catch basin, which is near the frontage road bordering Highway 7. So it's really those two things that we want to be sure are properly addressed. Number one, that water is not going to drain into our garage, and that it's going to be carried out toward the frontage road, toward Highway 7, where there is a catch basin. Now, Elizabeth pointed out that there are what they call risers that are attached to there's a storm sewer adjacent to the garage door opening, and there are risers that attach to piping that goes down underground toward the frontage road. And there are some clean-out areas, and we want to make sure that those clean-out areas are not buried in any way by any excavation that is done, because that would further potentially, it would interfere with drainage from that garage door area. So again, I hope I made my point clear, and I do apologize if it's hard without visualization to fully appreciate this. But I hope you get the picture, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Silverstein. There's another gentleman who wished to speak.
Can you address those issues?
I'd like to. You can do it now.
All right. Thank you, Manager Miller, President White, managers. So first, I can just kind of point out where these different elements are. So the riser pipes that he referred to are located kind of right about here. They are something that we identified upon review of a plan that Marlis Frankman, one of the members of the condo, had brought to our attention of a plan of their property. It was they're clean out structures for a storm drain that they have, a storm pipe that they have that's buried. And we provided that plan to the applicant, and they immediately sent out a survey crew to try to find them because they hadn't found them before, and determined that they've already been paved over. They figured out where they are, and with the construction, they've submitted a plan as to how they're going to ensure that there isn't any damage, and that with the repaving of the road that they'll be doing, they'll be uncovering those. So they should be able to now clean out that pipe a little more easily. And then the second, or I guess Dr. Silverstein's first comment regarding that high point up here. So just you can kind of see where I have the cursor. So it's a high point there. And so everything that's to the left of that point drains down towards the garage, and everything to the right of that point drains towards the filtration basin. And under the proposed scenario, there isn't going to be a change in the amount of water that is directed down. There's actually a reduction in the amount of water directed down towards the garage. And after meeting with Ms. Frankman, we reviewed the plans in some more detail and determined that the capacity of the curb cut down here was sufficient to accommodate the flow, and that the changes desired for the curb here were indicated on a additional plan set that we received from the applicant.
Thank you. Manager Rolls?
Quick question, the northeast corner there, that's in that rectangular box, way left.
Oh,
Right?
yes,
Is that a
here.
public utility space?
So that is a well house for the city.
Thank you.
Yep.
Could you highlight where the garage doors are?
So it's an underground garage, kind of right where I'm moving my cursor back and forth is the entrance to the underground parking.
Manager Shackleton?
So, Dr. Silverstein?
Yes.
On Google Earth,
Oh, very
it's
good.
actually,
Yeah.
what you're describing was clear as day.
Good.
There, my question is, I guess, in looking at this, there's a cement pad.
Yes.
There's a cement pad on the municipal side of that box, and it looks like there's been water flow across dirt. And I mean, if you looked at it from above, you could see there's a space where there's dirt and there's a space where there is not, and it's kind of on a line with how the driveway kind of turns into that. I interpreted that to mean that water flows, there's obviously a hill on this, and I interpreted it to mean the water was flowing down that hill and away from the structure towards the municipal structure. And so it's just a visual observation. I was wondering if there was any sense for how surface water flows.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton, managers. I'm having a hard time understanding your description of the aerial photo.
There's dirt on this corner,
Okay.
and this is the cement. This looks like a cement pad in front of the
Well house,
structure, the
yeah.
well house. And this is the driveway. There's a hill. There's obviously a hill here. I presume it's flattish here. The door to get into the parking garage is in here, and there's a narrowing of the path here by virtue of two stone walls, it looks like. And the driveway kind of arcs towards the wellhead, and there's a dirt road that comes up this way, and there's dirt on the cement pad here, and there's not over here, and what could be a line of surface water flow.
Okay, thank you, Manager Shackleton. That is more clear to me now. So I think that there is some water flow moving that direction. I think also a portion of that is probably just because they're driving the vehicles from the dirt road onto that portion of the cement pad when they access the well house.
They don't access it from the private drive?
No.
Okay.
The private, that,
Yes, they do.
The dirt
Yeah,
road.
The dirt road.
yeah,
Yes,
they
do.
access it from the dirt road.
Yeah.
Okay.
The dirt road was constructed by the city for maintenance of that
Got it.
well house.
All right, let's move along.
I should point out, if I might, Manager, that that cement pad, and I, stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, but that was designed for the possibility of their bringing in an emergency generator in the event that the generator in that well house goes out, because I guess that's you're the water experts, but that's an important spot because it's pumping water, I think, westward. And so I think that was put there as a safeguard in the event that the other unit failed, is my understanding.
Thank you.
Yes.
Silverstein.
Okay.
And you, sir, if you'd like to come forward.
Well,
Name and address first?
my name is Roger Anderson. I'm the developer and the applicant and also the engineer. I'm a civil engineer, and I've in my own company for 29 years now. We've done a lot of this drainage work. And this happens to be a project that I'm personally involved in. So all of the things that you've thrown out on the table here, I'd be glad to address because we've gone through this extremely thoroughly. And Elizabeth's been a great help in doing that. It's an interesting site, and I think we've worked very hard to comply with all the rules, and we've had interchanges back and forth probably 5 or 6 times, refining the plan to make it work. And I think now that we're at this point, it really is, it's a great plan. It's going to do what we want, and that's treat the stormwater and manage the stormwater. To a couple of the points that the doctor had, and we've had discussions on this, the confusion over water, more water going into their garage access really is just a matter of, engineers, when we put flow patterns on the drawing, we put a high point, and the water goes that way and that way. We put arrows to show where that break line is. I believe he interpreted that as, hey, we're sending more water there. No, that's where it's going now. And actually, the drainage area is slightly smaller than it was before. The curb also is right in alignment where it was before, but we'll probably slide that over a little bit if the city engineer would like to see that. These plans still need to be go through the final approval at with the city engineer and with the planning department and with the PUD and development agreement. So we've got a couple more steps. Another thing is it's a city well. It's one of their 4 that serve this treatment plant. We have to do some rearrangement of the water mains because we didn't put it in the easement in past years. But they visit there once or twice a day, generally with a pickup truck. Stop in. I don't know if they take readings or what they have to do. They usually come in on the dirt road. That dirt road just happens to be right over what has been called cleanouts here, but I believe they're actually risers that the water is supposed to go into. And then below there's a rock trench, just like a drain field trench, and that allows for infiltration. I believe that's the way I interpret it. So we found a couple deficiencies in their system when we surveyed, and now we know that the city's been driving right over one of the risers for a while. And we also found a little bit to the north where I believe that rock trench starts. There are a couple of chambers that were paved over 12 years ago that we don't have access to. We'll be digging in that area, and that probably should be looked at that time to make sure that they can perform their maintenance functions. And we'll work with Dr. Silverstein on those items. So if there are any other questions, I'd be happy to address it, but have pretty good knowledge of the site and what's going on there.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to approve permit 18248? Manager Sheckleton, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Now, any questions for Ms. Showalter? Mr. Welch.
Just a quick one, Elizabeth, on this graphic, and maybe Mr. Anderson, you have immediate knowledge. The subject parcel here is 2 separate parcels now.
Correct.
Actually 3. But it's a little hard to see the last one. There was a 2-inch wide remnant just to the east of the well house that we are giving to the city. Just for the sake of clarity, the surveyor says it didn't quite get it right, and it's being given to the city. So 2 is good enough for it.
It's not being called the lost.
Yeah, I appreciate the forthcoming nature of that property report. So Elizabeth, is there a need to have included in the declarations recorded here drainage rights between those properties? Will there be drainage from one to the other or vice versa?
My understanding is that there will not be drainage between the 2 parcels because there isn't any proposed impervious surface requiring stormwater treatment on the narrow parcel.
So that need not be in the declaration. And to clarify for the record, the concerns that Dr. Silverstein has raised, and these are, staff has addressed these with the residents of that condo complex in some conversations prior to the meeting tonight.
Correct.
Are there other questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving to permit 18-0153, 5525 Cedar Lake Road, St. Louis Park. Ms. Showalter again.
Great. Thank you, President White, managers. One last permit for you this evening. So this is the St. Louis Park Lifetime Fitness. And we're going to be, and this permit is before you because the applicant has requested a variance. So it's going to start with background, real triggers, talk about the variance, and then end with the staff recommendation. So this project is located in St. Louis Park in the Twin Lakes Sub-Watershed, just kind of at the interchange of Cedar Lake Road and Highway 100. And the proposed work on the property will be taking place sort of on the southern edge next to some railroad tracks, just kind of filling in the last little bit on the property. Zooming in, the applicant is proposing about a 5,000 square foot addition and a turf pad for an outdoor exercise space, and then we'll be treating that proposed impervious with a infiltration basin. So this site has had a fair amount of work that's taken place that's been permitted by the district previously. Back in 2008, there was reconstruction of parking lot and improvements to the tennis building on the eastern parking lot. Then in 2009, there was reconstruction of a portion of the western parking lot. And then in 2013, they reconstructed the entire parking lot on the western side and constructed a parking ramp. And just for reference, down at the bottom is the work that is proposed now. So this project triggers the stormwater management rule. The erosion control rule is implemented by the city of St. Louis Park. And so the central part of the stormwater management rule this evening is the Common Scheme of Development Framework, which requires that development be considered in aggregate since 2005. So all work that's taken place since 2005 is used to determine the treatment scope that's applied. So to kind of compare what that means, by implicating that Common Scheme framework, this project is viewed as a redevelopment on a parcel greater than 5 acres with a decrease in impervious surface and greater than 40% site disturbance. It's a decrease because when you take the balance of all of the projects, there's been a slight reduction. That requires that volume control is provided for all impervious surface on the site, which amounts to about 30,000 cubic feet of abstraction, which would involve approximately 7.5 pounds of phosphorus removal. If this were viewed as a standalone project, it would be a redevelopment that increases impervious surface less than 50% with a less than 40% site disturbance. So that requires phosphorus, rate, and volume control for the new impervious surface, which would be about 470 cubic feet of abstraction and around 1/4 pound of phosphorus removal. So when we look back at all the work that's taken place, when we look at this in aggregate, it's been over 40% site disturbance, but you'll also see that area in yellow happened in 2013, and at that point, the Common Scheme framework should have been implicated and the applicant should have been required to provide volume control treatment for the entire site. Staff at that time did not identify that and only required the applicant to treat the work that was proposed at that time, which involved a decrease in impervious surface, and so a BMP was implemented. So at this time, since there has been more than 40% site disturbance since 2005, treatment is required for the entire site once again. So upon being informed that that requirement was triggered, Lifetime Fitness had requested that we investigate some regional treatment options and has been a great partner in working through that process and trying to identify ways that they could provide stormwater treatment in a way that would be less disruptive to their club operations. So first I just want to explain to all of you how water is working on this property. So a large portion of the stormwater drains towards Cedar Lake Road where it travels through storm sewer. And then another portion goes south to the railroad tracks. Both of those meet up and in the large wetland complex, which is ditched into city storm sewer, which then makes its way under 100 into the Twin Lakes Pond, which is maintained by the Watershed District, was constructed in the 90s. And from there it goes to Twin Lake, which eventually makes its way into Cedar Lake. So the regional treatment options that we explored included a restoration of the wetland complex. Due to the size of the complex and differing ownership, we determined that that was not a viable alternative. There's an existing basin on Cedar Lake Road that the storm sewer on Cedar Lake Road empties into. Excavation of that basin. Manager Miller?
You made a statement that the wetland restoration was not viable because it had different owners. I mean, I don't get it.
Thank you, Manager Miller and managers. So it has a number of different owners throughout it, which would require quite a lot of coordination, which was kind of that's an overcomable issue. The larger issue was the size of the wetland and the difficulty of doing a restoration where you have limited access on such a large wetland. And when working with the wetland consultants at Wank Associates, we determined that there wasn't a viable way to get a restoration to sort of take there, that we would be failing to manage invasive cattails forever and would probably never make progress.
Well, if I can, because this is a pretty complex deal. That whole area used to be a wetland. It was supposed to be the site of the Giants Stadium for baseball before the Metropolitan Stadium was built down in Bloomington. And the whole area's been filled, and we've got what we had in the past with big rainstorms, huge problems with the lake flooding and flooding out townhouses around there, etc. And everybody just does a little bit to contribute to the flooding, but that whole site was open before Lifetime or Northwest Sports built it probably in the 70s. Mm-hmm. So we're losing all this pervious surface, and it seems to me that the solution that's proposed takes care of the one site and relieves their pressure, but we're putting pressure on the whole system. You can see all the brown spots, and they keep on getting narrower and narrower, and less folding. And that drains into Cedar Lake drains into Isles, and et cetera, and maybe we get it down to Lake Hiawatha eventually. All this stuff fits together, and
If we allow Ms. Showalter to finish, we may get answers to some of our questions. Too.
well, we may get answers, but we seem to be addressing this as it's a huge site, and it's totally impervious now.
I'm going to ask you to hold any further questions and allow Ms. Showalter to continue.
Is this a staff presentation or is this a board discussion?
It is first a staff presentation and then it is a board discussion. It is a staff presentation followed by comments from a member of the public, and then there'll be a motion, a second, and there'll be a board discussion.
Well, before there's a board discussion, there has to be information presented.
Let's finish the presentation, see what other information you want besides that. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you, managers. Our second area of investigation was that existing basin, which is on property owned by the city of St. Louis Park, but it's not currently maintained as a stormwater basin. And excavation of that would be considered a wetland impact. And we had some challenges as far as where you could expand it, and we were unable to find a design for that would minimize wetland impacts and provide the necessary engineering ability to create a basin that would function to treat the sufficiently large amount of stormwater. The third option is a cartridge system, which would have been located where the ditched wetland enters into a storm pipe. We were unable to find an area for access coming out of that wetland that would allow for the maintenance required on such a system. And we were unable to find a place where you could install a system like that would be dry a sufficient portion of the time to allow the system to properly function.
That's not city-owned land? Or that's not city-owned wetland?
The majority of the wetland is owned by the city.
The southwest corner? Because that's where the school district parks there.
Yeah, that portion is not. Their city has easement.
The city has easement?
Yes. Then we moved across Highway 100 to the Twin Lake Pond, which the district owns, and explored some opportunities for improvements to that pond. Ideally, the pond would be expanded. It's currently about a third of the size that it should be for the amount of drainage that it receives. Unfortunately, it is in a pretty tight location. On the south, it is bordered by a very heavily used park, and on the north, it is bordered by wetland. And neither option really allowed the expansion of the pond, so then we turned to improvements to the pond that would allow it to better remove phosphorus and potentially reduce maintenance costs. The only viable option that we found, it would involve addition of a iron-enhanced filter bench to the pond, which would increase district maintenance costs by about $10,000 to $20,000 every 7 to 10 years. And given the low amount of phosphorus removal that would provide, district staff did not find that to be a sound use of district funds. The last option that we explored was improvements to outfalls from St. Louis Park storm sewers that enter directly into Twin Lake. Because no road reconstruction is currently proposed in the area, it was deemed infeasible to make improvements to the outfalls to treat the water quality. So upon the inability for lifetime staff and district staff and St. Louis Park staff to identify a regional option, the Lifetime Fitness requested a variance. So to remind managers, the variance criteria are that managers may grant a variance when there are special conditions inherent to the property that make strict compliance with the rule, mean that strict compliance with the rule would cause undue hardship because of those special conditions. That hardship cannot be created by the applicant. Granting the variance cannot merely be a convenience. There's no feasible or prudent alternative, and that granting the variance will not be contrary to the intent of the rule. So the variance application submitted by Lifetime Fitness requests the variance due to the fact that compliance with the full scope of the rule would involve significant disruption to club operations. We're looking at several acres of disturbance to install an underground stormwater system in addition to many changes of existing routing. Furthermore, they state that staff did not inform Lifetime Fitness of the requirement when it should have been previously triggered, and at that time compliance would have been easier because the project already involved reconstruction of a large portion of the parking lot compared to this project, which is disconnected from the parking lot and is smaller in scale. Lifetime has indicated that when future work takes place, they understand that the full scope of the rule will apply and treatment will be required for all impervious surface. And have indicated that they are interested in continuing to work with the district and identifying the best ways to pursue that treatment at that time. They've also provided a couple of additional improvements on the site as an indication of their desire to meet the intent of the rules. That is two what are called saffle baffles or sump catch basins that would remove sediment from the parking lot before entering the storm sewer on Cedar Lake Road. And then also on an existing filtration basin, doing some excavation and putting in sand and iron, which will allow for greater phosphorus removal in that basin. Staff recommends that if the board finds that they should grant a variance, we recommend that you delegate a permitting authority back to staff for issuance of the permit to allow for the development of final plans for those additional improvements. Staff and Lifetime Fitness did not find a need to do that engineering on those specific design, elements unless the board was going to grant the variance. So the variance request that you are being asked to make a decision on is a variance from the requirement to treat the entire site and instead only require treatment for the additional impervious area proposed, that's phosphorus rate and volume treatment, and provide the discussed site improvements. If the manager so choose, you may direct staff to develop a memorandum of understanding outlining how the district and Lifetime Fitness will work together on future projects in the Twin Lakes Sub-Watershed to achieve our shared goals of moving towards bringing the site into compliance so that Lifetime Fitness will be able to avoid disruptions to club operations and our desire to build partnerships and work towards improved water quality and addressing water quantity issues. And with that, I am available to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there members of the public who'd like to address the board concerning this permit application? I see no. Yes, sir, come forward. Your name and address first.
Good evening. My name is Aaron Kohler. I'm the Senior Director of Real Estate with Lifetime. Address is 2902 Corporate Place in Chanhassen. I just wanted to address the board for a moment and give staff credit for the efforts they've put into this. We came into this with the idea that this was a small, relatively simple project that has, kind of ballooned into something that we certainly didn't expect. I think we worked hard, our staff with the watershed staff, to try and find a solution here. Our goal is to, do right by everybody and make this right. Coming and asking for the variance was, I think, as you can see, a last resort. It was. We've been at a handful of points in this conversation where it was, hey, I think we have a solution, and it's come to us, we kind of mulled it over. Yeah, we can get on board with that. Oh wait, that one doesn't work for whatever reason. The next, okay, that's a lot more, but all right, we can get on board with that. No, never mind, that one doesn't work. So really a kind of a last resort here. I'm open to conversation on figuring out how to make this work for everybody, but right now we're, between us, we've kind of run into a wall, I think.
Thank you, Mr. Kohler. Is there anyone else? Is there a motion to approve permit 18153?
I have some questions I'd like to ask now.
Is there a motion to approve the permit first of all? Ms. Showalter.
President White, I believe that council typically recommends approval of the variance.
You are so right. You are so right. Let me go back and start over again. Is there a motion, Mr. Welsh?
Just to be clear, as Ms. Showalter presented, the permit is not actually ready for approval. So the only item before the board is, well, it's two-part, the variance, and then should you grant the variance, delegates the authority to staff to decide the permit. But the variance needs to be decided first before that becomes relevant.
And we're also directing staff to go out and try to get a memorandum of understanding.
Ms. Showalter raised that as a possibility for the board's consideration. It's not required. The other two are dependent on each other. That one is not.
Okay, thank you. Is there a motion to approve the variance?
I have some questions.
I give up. Ask your question.
Could you go back to the regional option slide, please? You said that the existing basin, you said that it was managed by St. Louis Park.
Thank you, Manager Shackleton. It is owned by St. Louis Park. in my discussions with the public works staff from the city, they are not maintaining it. They are not entirely sure when or why or if it was constructed.
Is there an outfall there?
There is an outfall. It is unclear whether it is that just the flow coming out from there has created a basin, whether it was an intentional basin, whether it was a natural basin that they added an outfall to.
So it's just called a basin. It's not like it's something that is collecting sediment and.
It is acting in a similar way to a stormwater pond, in that it is removing some sediment prior to entrance to the wetland, but it is not being maintained as such.
Mr. Meehan?
I concur with Mr. Showalter. I just want to make sure if there's other questions.
Manager Olson?
The property immediately to the west is hundreds of small storage garages. So that's 100% hardcover. Where are they sending their water?
Thank you, Manager Olson. I am not entirely sure, but I believe that it is going, that I know that they do not have any sort of stormwater management. It was constructed before it was required. So their stormwater is similarly going north and south, I believe.
Manager Shackleton?
What is the classification of this wetland?
This wetland is a managed 3, which is the lowest quality.
Any sense for how it's functioning for removing sediment and pollutants?
It's probably doing, it's doing what wetlands do in, providing some sediment capture. We're uncertain as to whether it is a net contributor or a net remover of phosphorus due to the extensive development around it for quite some time. There is likely a fair amount of phosphorus that is being held within in the wetland and may be exported through the storm system. But that's pretty much at this point just our hunch.
Sure. At one point you had a pipe shed on this, if I remember right. And my question is really going to be about the iron triangle. And that may be a term you may not be familiar with, but way back when. Okay, and where does the water in there come from? Because if I recall correctly, the iron triangle is the section that's created by the BM line, main line, and the CP curving, or the old CP, an old rail line that curves off towards Minneapolis, and the CP line going north. And it's like am I wrong in remembering that it's a significant wetland of some?
So, Manager Shackleton, I'm not as familiar with the Iron Triangle. So I'm assuming it's the part that's just south of Lifetime?
It's.
Yeah. So that area as well, I believe, makes its way into that main line that moves east towards the Twin Lakes Pond, if I remember right.
Are there, to Manager Miller's point, given the size of this wetland complex and the history associated with the industry and the excavation that happened north and west of there, and I honestly, I'd never heard that Twin Lake Pond was undersized. That's fascinating to hear. Are there not opportunities west of 100 to provide relief in terms of pressure for downstream pieces?
When looking at the site and looking at the different properties that are available, the properties that did have public access, because this was done in coordination with the City of St. Louis Park, properties that were available that weren't necessarily an existing wetland, there were not as many opportunities to create that without starting to look at private property.
Well, the city owns most of that complex.
Absolutely, Manager Miller. And a lot of it is all currently wetlands that we have right now. And so as part of that, looking at the wetland management, when the staff look through that. Managing the wetland component and the mitigation that would go along with it, that I believe undercame an infeasible opportunity, at least at this point in time.
Yeah, to further expand on that, because of the way that wetland regulation works, the creating additional storage within that wetland creating additional storage in that wetland would be unlikely to yield sufficient replacement credit or be considered as a no-loss activity, that wetland bank credits or wetland creation elsewhere would be required in order to meet state and federal regulations.
My last question was about Twin Lake Pond. I live 3 blocks from it.
Uphill or down?
Uphill, fortunately. Though on a rainy day, you never know. The pipe, if I recall correctly, goes north off 26 underneath just to the east of the basketball court, underneath the
Correct.
bituminous. It would seem like there could be. It seems like there's space there to actually expand that pond into the city-owned parcel that's just to the southeast corner of it. If it's undersized by a third, which is what my notes indicate, it seems like you could actually increase the size of it by a third. And it might be a broader question than this permit, but.
Thanks, Manager Shackleton. Just first to clarify, it's not undersized by a third and that we need to make it 1/3 bigger. We need to make it 3 times bigger.
Got it.
And so while there is some opportunity to make it slightly larger, there's an issue between construction cost and payoff that makes it, and you'd still end up being substantially far away from reaching the actual recommended capacity for these types of basins. So.
Manager Shackleton, too, as part of that, in coordination with the city viewed this as a very highly used park and looked to limit the actual footprint of the pond, so encroachment further into the park area was not a favorable option for them to essentially significantly limit the use within that park area, in looking at going to the south.
If the weir was shifted from being from here to being here, and this became wetter, would that change the hydrodynamics?
You run into similar wetland
Yeah.
considerations that you ran into on the west side of Lifetime, so the big wetland complex there. So the mitigation components that would come along with it, we wouldn't have necessarily the space to be able to do that, so we'd end up going to a banking situation again to be able to do that.
I'm sorry, you started talking and I started thinking that I didn't process everything you said. That's I'll ask the question I think I was going to ask, but I want to make sure I actually heard you.
So the area between the weir and Twin Lakes is
Yes.
considered a wetland right now. So if we were to go and excavate within that to create some of that storage area, we would run into a similar situation that we ran into on the west side of Lifetime, where we would need to mitigate that area
Yes.
that we would impact. And the area that we would have available wouldn't necessarily exist within that similar geography, so we'd end up having to look for wetland credits and going through a banking system outside of that system.
So at work today, the county board had a briefing on ditches, and I thought, and somebody asked, can you fill in ditches? And I'm only asking this question because in the middle of a rainstorm, I've walked out into that wetland, and water coming over the weir goes straight into the channel and moves rapidly down the channel, takes a left, and moves equally rapidly. And I've observed that in the middle of a rainstorm while standing on the wetland. And my question is, can a ditch be filled to impound the flow of water such that the wetland functions as a sponge, not a channelized sponge?
You can have it.
So, Manager Shackleton, managers, you can do that. What ends up happening is then you impact the characteristics of the current wetland, so then you looking at changing the type that comes along with that. So you'd run into similar type of situations as to if you were to excavate it, it's the changing of the type that comes along with that.
Wouldn't it naturalize it?
It would come to some natural equilibrium, but it would change from the current state at which it is, given the different types of wetlands that exist, the type and the characteristics that it currently is versus what we would do it if we started to impound water behind that. The characteristics of that wetland would change because it would be carrying more water, much like if you went from a shallow.
Is that a bad thing?
What's that?
Is that a bad thing? I understand that you're saying this is
No,
a technical change.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. It would be something that we would have to, as we would look at a permitting process to go through that, we would have to evaluate, and I think that's what staff evaluated when they looked at some of the wetland components of it. How that would change the characteristics that you would have to look at mitigation components upon that. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, but according to the wetland regulations, it's something we would have to address further beyond the scope of this current geography.
Mr. Whisker.
Thank you, President White, managers. I just wanted to jump in and offer my observations since that's what we're doing. And I welcome the board to continue exhausting questions on all the different regional treatment solutions. That's why staff and Chris are here. I just wanted to reflect that, under years of coaching from the board, that's trickled down into our permitting staff. And my observation on this project is they've really gone above and beyond to look at every single possible kind of solution out here within reason while respecting the timelines and process of the applicant, who is really here because the watershed district in previous years didn't advise them on the correct application of the rules. And we wouldn't be here looking at what the treatment requirements should be and how they could be met if they'd have been required to meet those treatment requirements when they came in for a previous permit applicant. So Lifetime's been a good partner, and I think staff have looked at all of the things that you're talking about, all of the different wetland restorations, hydraulic, holding water back and changing outlet structures, excavating wetlands, excavating stormwater facilities. In that major complex south of the rail line for Twin Lakes Pond, we've had extensive conversations with the City of St. Louis Park Public Works on each one of these issues as each one of them's been explored. And they've either come into technical conflict and they don't work. They've come into regulatory conflict because we can't just excavate wetlands, or if we can, and there's a rationale for it ecologically, they're not providing the cost benefit or the treatment required. In the case of Twin Lake Ponds, to expand them and provide that level of treatment downstream, we'd have to take out major recreational facilities, which the city did look at and run up the flagpole and said, no, that's not going to be politically viable given how that asset's used within the community. And so one of the things that Elizabeth mentioned tonight is I think Lifetime and staff and probably the city continue to remain open to looking at options out here, and if there's specific things that you want us to go back and look at as part of more of a regional approach, capital project, public partnership approach. I mean, that's the lens through which everybody's been working to this date is how do we work with Lifetime and the city to get more public benefit and leverage the resources that Lifetime would otherwise had to invest in the site. But from my perspective, everything that we'd normally consider in a planning situation, a non-regulatory situation for this whole region, we've really gone through and looked at. We've even looked at all the private development that might be in pipeline, where we might be able to route water into a different private property and negotiate easements with a different private property and leverage investments that way. And so really, as everybody's mentioned, that's why we're here tonight. And the total amount of requirements that aren't being met, just to put the numbers to it that are in the permit report, is 7.5 pounds of phosphorus and half an acre foot of water. Those are the design standards that if we'd have, I think, had the original permit designed for, we wouldn't be here for, and that's the increment that we're looking for. And we haven't found a solution in all of those types of options that we've looked at that meet those metrics yet.
Thank you. Manager Olson?
I would move approval for variance as long as we had that second recommendation you had in there that said we would partner with them in the future and work closely with the client.
Second, Manager Shackleton. Any further discussion?
Yeah, I'm not going to vote for this. We've been doing a patch and work all the way through this thing for 15 or 18 years. And every time, well, we just do this permit, we'll just do that one, and we're creating a problem that's going to, it's not Lifetime's problem. I mean, it sounds like it's our problem that we created by not informing them about the requirements of making the entire 10 acres impermeable. How many acres is it?
It's 10.8 acres.
Okay, impermeable, and there's all kinds of public properties all around it that could be used for, I don't think they should be penalized, but I don't think we should just say, well, you know, it's gonna flood somebody else eventually, but that's, you know, that's, I'm not gonna support it.
Any other comments? Manager Becker?
I have a question for Mr. Olson. Is your motion to approve the variance contingent upon the execution of a memorandum of understanding?
As worded in her recommendation, yes.
So that it's contingent.
Mhm. It's not necessary, but I would prefer that in there.
Well, I would too.
Yep.
Manager Loftus?
A question for our legal counsel. Are these variances recorded with the property?
Manager Loftus, managers, short answer is no. Variance is a regulatory determination that the board makes, and the record of it is in the meeting tonight and in the packet for the meeting tonight.
But you don't record it against the address so that future property owners are aware? My question is, you know, an MOU can be signed and forgotten. How do what's the most useful and out there way to make sure that nobody is surprised again in the future when the next project comes about? And, you know, lots of things can happen, right? It could take 10 years, it could take 20 years, it could be a different owner who could then claim they didn't know. So sometimes variances are recorded on properties, and so if it's a condition in the variance, perhaps any new owner would catch that when doing title work with a purchase, which I can't imagine an MOU would show up. There's really no way it would. Just so that we acknowledge the encumbrance of this in some way, or what's the best way to get that
Right.
acknowledged?
I answer your question directly that Manager Loftus, that variances are not as a matter of course or as a function of the rule recorded, but variances necessarily involve the manager's weighing and making a judgment as to whether the necessary showing of hardship has been made, and the rule under which you grant variances specifically provides that the managers, in order to work that balance, can condition the approval on reasonable mitigation measures that the managers find will limit the impact on water resources from granting the variance. So if you wanted to go that route, it would be relatively easy for, and in fact, the staff, in recent years, we've been dealing with this a lot because we have these developers come in and they subdivide and they sell off the parcels for individual home builders, and staff has made a practice of increasingly memorializing those in declarations on the properties. We could do that here. You could condition approval of the variance on recordation of the shortfall and the requirement that future projects on the property will be subject to the district's rules in a deed note of some sort. So it's not usually done, but it could be done if the managers would be, if that would add a measure of comfort. And Madam President, well, I'll defer for a second, but I'll add something on the MOU when the managers are ready.
Thank you.
Right, but if someday they were to redevelop the site and...
I think the concept you're offering, Elizabeth has spoken to already, and the applicant's aware of, so they know when they come back that they will need to meet the full boat requirements that Mr. Whisker just outlined, that differential plus whatever it is that they want to do next time. But you're right, that's sort of on staff to remind and to be aware when that permit comes in that, oh yeah, we have to do this. The flip side is that the rules may change. In fact, the rules will change. That's why Mr. Dietrich is here, one of the reasons he's here. So the future requirements that would apply would be whatever the Board of Managers judges the rules should be in the future.
Manager Miller.
What we can do when Vanilla comes in for an addition, the last time they came in, we gave them variance too, and we know that because they couldn't accommodate the flooding on site, so we said, well, you know, they filled in a wetland to build the school in the first place, and you know, it's compounding, and you know, we don't want to be penalized lifetime, and we don't want to penalize Vanilla, but now we're penalizing everybody downstream. We went to great extent to on the west end with Duke on solving their problem and assisting them, and the net effect was we took Brownie Lake off the impaired wetland or water as a resource. I think we're just by granting this permit and ignoring the other potential means of solving this problem, whether it involves the district or Lifetime or both, and get St. Louis Park say, well, you can't do that. Well, they're getting all the property taxes off of it. They ought to be able to accommodate. They ought to be able to accommodate some of this cost to help mitigate the water quality and the water quantity issues that are created by this.
Manager Shackleton.
Recognize this is a Class 3 wetland, and there's an open basin at the end of a pipe. Would that not qualify as an increased degradation of the wetland by kind of default? If we have a wetland in existence that is pretty uniform in its extent of cattails, and there's a spot where it's open and it's at the end of a pipe, we can presume that that's open because of the pipe, and that there's sedimentation that's flowing in because there's a boundary of trees. Isn't it incumbent on us to fix that problem?
Thank you, Manager Shackleton. I think, you know, it's based on my review of aerial photography and exploring the options surrounding that basin. It does appear that that basin's been there for quite a while. That doesn't by any means mean that it's a natural basin. I would anticipate not. And I mean, this is a somewhat typical situation in older wetlands. Before we had wetland regulations, you always put your stormwater pond in your wetland. And so I would say that this is a fairly typical situation, and in some ways, by having that open basin there, it is providing some water quality treatment before the water enters the larger wetland, which could be a favorable outcome.
Could we not make it more effective? And I guess, I don't know if you're the right person to ask this question to, because it expands upon this permit, but could we not make that outfall more effective as a pre-treatment prior to water's discharged into the greater wetland?
Mr. Whisker.
Could that not serve as some offsets?
Mr. Whisker.
Manager Shackleton, managers, I think I can't answer that question. I don't think anybody can answer the question of, you know, if you want to run through aerial images and try and find alternatives tonight and sort of do feasibility tests. I don't think that we're going to get to a conclusion. If the board has, which it sounds like certain members of the board do, have interest in, I don't want to say more thorough analysis, because I feel like a very thorough analysis has been done, but a complete feasibility analysis of the Sub-Watershed and working with the city and looking at every possible type of stacked benefit and how flooding works and routing and everything. That's definitely something that we can do and come back and present and give you information and provide even more context of what the shortfalls are on this site respective to all possible alternatives. That said, again, I think staff has, with WENC, like we normally do in a planning frame with the City of St. Louis Park and with the applicant, gone through a very long list of options looking for public-private partnership solutions to achieving this 9 pounds and half an acre feet. So one other point of clarification is obviously it's the board's decision on variance. Staff don't make recommendations on that. We try and give you an objective picture of the facts, and then that's up for your consideration. If there's an interest in looking at this more comprehensively, staff can work with St. Louis Park, continue working with the applicant, which I know they're willing to do, to look at a bigger picture and other alternatives. So I think it's consideration of the variance, and then this big picture look at what are all of the different issues in this particular sub-watershed. What would it cost to address them? Whose responsibilities are those? What are the regulatory implications? What's technically feasible? What's your palatability for cost benefit? All those sorts of things. I don't think we can go through that level of detail here tonight.
The reason I've been kind of doing a deep dive on some of these random points is because we made a mistake. And we made a mistake several years ago. And Dick's right. Like, this was one huge wetland complex that now has car dealerships, religious institutions, educational institutions, lots of private homes, radio antenna, and a lot of cattail. I don't think that Lifetime should bear the brunt of our mistake. But if there's an opportunity for us to help them meet our goals, that would be great. If there's an opportunity for us to remedy our mistake jointly, in part because of their application, that's appropriate. And that's, and I want to just acknowledge the amount of work you did, because it's a complicated area, and I know that because I've lived there, and I've looked at it a lot. And I also don't believe that just because something is in the current state doesn't mean that it can't be made better, irrespective of what wetland classification it is. And so I did second the motion, and I continue to, even if there is an amendment that was not articulated explicitly, I don't think.
I asked her to bring it up.
Okay.
So that's what's up there right now. I'm looking at that whole page.
Okay. But I would like to explore how to do something in here. And I don't know if this basin that I look at as a scour basin, thanks to Google Earth, and Hennepin County property map, like, let's try to figure out how to do something that actually makes sense in this space. And I know it's not a primed project area, but we're not talking about a lot.
I am in support of the motion made by Manager Olson. Every day we deal with historical decisions that we would not make today. And some of them are very old indeed, some are newer, before the Wetland Act, for example, before WACA. And we just need to do what we can where we are. So to approve this variance, for all the reasons that variances are given, not a situation that was created by Lifetime Fitness, for example, we can have this conversation around a memorandum of understanding and look for solutions, look for some remedies for the situation if they are available. But we can't turn back the clock, and we just have to do the best we can going forward. Mr. Welch.
The managers, and Madam President, the recommendation that Elizabeth has thrown up here on her slide, the second one that Manager Olson has added, and just try to offer a little bit of framework to for the manager's consideration about how to make this direction and decision. So the permit approval, or the variance approval, the permit of course is not before you as we said, but the variance is subject to conditions as Manager Loftus and I discussed a little bit, and could also be subject to stipulations. The draft of the second bullet here that Elizabeth has, and I'm sorry, the condition would be a thing that had to happen before the variance would become operative. So they would need to get that done before they had their variance. Then they would, presumably this would be enough direction for them that they'd go ahead and flesh out these plans, pursue the permit, but that would be for the applicant to decide based on what you do. If it were a stipulation, that would mean they would get the variance, but would still legally have the obligation to do the MOU. The idea of the MOU is drafted here not to function as either of those things, but to be manager's direction to staff. The one consideration that I want to raise from sort of a policy perspective is there is no memorandum of understanding right now. So we would be somewhat, it would be a little bit like saying, Elizabeth, go be creative. You know, you have to before they get a permit. So it's a little bit of a squishy thing to condition a manager's approval on. The declaration idea or deed note is not squishy. That would be very specific. And we could work out that language, but for your consideration.
Manager Olson, you said that you were wanting to move this language, which directs our staff to draft an MOU. It
Right.
doesn't require.
Right, but it's not related to this variance. It's related to future projects in the Twin Lakes Sub-Watershed. Okay, so what I'm saying is, let's go for the variance based on that interpretation of the entire property. And that's done. And we would like to see the MOU developed so that there's no communication difficulty between Lifetime and us. Everything that may be a future project is completely understood and work together.
So neither a condition nor a stipulation, but
Right,
parallel direction.
right.
Is there anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No, want to be reported.
All right, could you do a roll call for
I
us?
say no too.
We'll ask Mr. Welch to do a roll call.
Manager Olson,
Aye.
Manager Loftus,
Nay.
Manager Rognus,
No.
Manager Miller,
No.
Manager White,
Yes.
Manager Shackleton.
Aye.
Manager Becker.
No.
The vote is 3-4. The motion does not carry.
Manager Miller?
I'm not against the project. We had all kinds of, this is a big deal here. It's been going on for a really long time. And it never gets solved because we're always accommodating somebody. And the one time that we didn't accommodate, we became partners and we both spent a lot of money on the West End, on the Duke Realty project. And we had a big win there, and for everybody. And just going through the process here of issuing the permits is not why I'm sitting on this board. We used to approve all the permits at the board level years ago. I'm for getting some long-term solutions that accommodate the built-in natural environment, and we're not doing that here with this. I'm a little surprised that it came this way without a bunch of other discussions, because there's a lot of policy decisions that were assumed in the recommendations. You did a nice job of pointing them out. We'll grant you that, but you know, I'm not criticizing the work that you did, but the policy decisions should have been addressed a lot sooner than coming here now. I'm looking for James to give us directions how we can accommodate this permit and still address these issues that are going to keep on compounding in this sub-watershed.
Right now?
Yeah,
Okay.
because it may lead to a motion.
Sure. Well, I think the board has to make some decision collectively on if you're willing, how you want to separate the issues of a broader study in partnership with Lifetime Fitness, because I've heard from Elizabeth, and I haven't had an opportunity to have direct dialogue, but heard that they're willing to continue partnering and looking big picture and working with us in the city of St. Louis Park, that if there's an opportunity for public-private partnership that we've missed to invest in this area and fundamentally address their issue and get even larger public benefit, that they're interested in working with us on that. And from my understanding, I think, the folks at Lifetime and their consultant team are pretty sharp folks. They've looked at the cost that it would require to invest in their site and have some numbers that we could work through and say, these are the cost caps for investing in this area, and we could go off and we could work in partnership to come back and bring you a broader analysis. And I think the question for tonight, the more immediate question is the board as a whole not comfortable approving the variance until you have even more information and want that study done and want more negotiation and us to bring that back? Are you comfortable approving the variance and directing us to develop this partnership? And how are those tied? Is it a stipulation condition? So, I mean, that's all I can offer you at this point. I hear that there's interest from, majority of the board, it sounds like, in having more granular level information about what are all the issues in the sub-watershed, what are the numbers in terms of acre feet and pounds, and how's everything routed, what are the constraints, where's the city, and we can go off and do that and look for some direction from the board on, are you comfortable moving the variance forward and developing a partnership agreement and how that's tied together, or are you not? And you're holding up the variance approval until we develop more of a partnership framework and bring more information back. All I'm hearing is you need more information.
May I address the board?
Yes, come forward, Mr. Kohler.
Quite honestly, I agree with everything that everyone has had to say. Just a bit of my perspective. We have two issues at play. We have the variance for the project that we're proposing. So taking that issue alone, what we're proposing and the improvements that go with it from a stormwater management perspective are not significant, but slightly above what would be required for the added impervious area of just that project. So while it doesn't get close to correcting the wrong that has happened in the past, it is an incremental improvement from what is there today. So the variance itself, to me, is everybody wins, though it's not to a huge extent. Nobody loses on the variance. There's a small win for everyone. The second piece of, how do we get to some equitable solution where everybody gets the win that should have happened originally. For us, we've agreed to make a financial contribution a couple times on different projects. The amount ratcheted up to a point where we got, to the point of, I don't know if this is worth doing. So I think we've found our limit there. So for us, we've committed to that financial contribution in the past. We would continue to commit to that same financial contribution. What Lifetime can't be in the business of is trying to be watershed managers. We don't know anything and aren't that helpful. So for us, you know, I'd like to find a way to get past this and, you know, move forward. You know, if Lifetime can make the financial contribution and the watershed can hold it, and, you know, when you find the right project, you know, spend it as you see fit. You don't want my input on that. That's what I would propose. If that's feasible with the board and the rules, I don't know, but.
I don't think we've ever.
Mr. Welch?
Go ahead, Manager Shackleton. I just was going to touch base with Elizabeth about the framework for the decision, and for the manager's background, there is no permit in front of you, but there is a request for a decision on a regulatory matter that needs to be acted on within the statutory timeframe. So where are we at in that timeframe? You have June 25th on your memo. But I'm not sure if that's the date of the variance application in its complete form.
The variance application was submitted on June 25th in its complete form, so.
So, managers, that gives you 2 more meetings, 1 more meeting, 2 more meetings.
2 more meetings.
Yep, in the 60-day window. At that point, if there isn't any different option, you could extend that time frame, but that is a matter that does need to be addressed, not tonight.
What is the consequence of blowing the 60 days?
Automatic legal approval.
Could I,
Manager Loftus.
President, wait, I'm curious to hear what Manager Becker and Manager Rognus's concerns are, but just so everybody knows what mine are. I think I agree with your comments about the variance that's in front of us tonight is to a point where you can't change a lot to improve it. But I do think we could improve greatly on just, I'm hesitant on MOUs. I don't think they're particularly effective. But I do like your idea of a quick partnership agreement that holds an escrow of some amount that you've discussed, that goes in tandem with analyzing this area more and finding those opportunities and applying that amount to that once that's found. So that gets me closer. That second condition, that's the reason I voted against. I don't really care for that condition. I'd prefer to see something more concrete. And I like what you're proposing as a step forward that's defined, and then I would love for there not to be any more surprise in the future, which is why I'd love to see something recorded or documented. But I like this idea of James and what you said, kind of those two things, the partnership and analyzing ideas and getting some, whatever you guys have talked about, amount of escrowed monies towards that, so that you can move forward on your project. That gets me closer to voting for it. The exact motion that you set forward, I wasn't in support of. I don't know where the other managers who voted against it stand, but that's where I'm at.
I just think that there's absolutely no wiggle room to to comply with this situation, and I think we just have to address that.
Manager Becker?
And I voted against it because of the promise of a greater solution. Otherwise, we'll be back at this in the future with another developer in the area.
Do I have it correct that had this been considered as in the aggregate, the previous permit cycle, we wouldn't be here at all?
That is correct.
So we have 60 days from,
To do what?
or we have 2 meetings
Do what?
to either act on this or not.
change? Ms. Showalter?
Managers, I think that it would be useful for staff if we could get some inclination from you as to whether the proposal that Lifetime suggested of a cash contribution at this time that would be held in escrow, as Jessica indicated, or Manager Loftus indicated, if that is something that the board is interested in staff investigating further. The board or the district did previously have a cash in lieu of program, which I believe Manager Miller was on the board at that point in time, which was discontinued under a previous rule revision. And so if the board would like staff to investigate how we could arrange such an agreement, it would be useful for that direction prior to bringing anything back to you.
Manager Shackleton?
Feels like a pay-to-play.
Yeah.
And I don't know.
Why did we get rid of that rule?
Well, I don't know why we got rid of the rule, but if we were going to implement it, it's like, what dollar amount per pound is a pound of phosphorus?
Yeah,
And what
it's all over the map.
what treatment method is best to address that pound of phosphorus? It's dependent on site. It's dependent on volume, and I like the concept, and I really like, as a manager, I appreciate the willingness to say, we don't know what the best answer is here. We think you do. We entrust us with X, but I don't know how to put the appropriate number on X. And I acknowledge that you identified how much your organization can afford and went with that. But I don't know how we protect a resource by monetizing it that way.
Manager Becker, are you interested in making a motion simply to approve the variance? And then we could decide that we'd like to have further discussion about this region or this question.
No, I don't think I am at this point.
Okay. Well, I don't, Ms. Showalter.
Thank you, President White. To answer Manager Shackleton's question, current staff's understanding as to the reason that the payment in lieu of program was discontinued was the difficulty of finding projects within the sub-watersheds to utilize the funds for, and that it was obligating the district to essentially focus its capital project on where there were people who had chose to use the pay in lieu of program.
Sure.
And
Seems appropriate.
so if the managers were comfortable with the understanding that they would have to spend the money in the Twin Lakes sub-watershed on this individual basis, that would be a consideration.
Madam Chair,
Manager Becker?
I would move a reconsideration of the prior motion.
Second your motion.
You did vote on the prevailing side.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't second then. I forgot. Is there a second to Manager Becker's motion to reconsider?
I'll second it.
Motion
Everybody
fails
is the
for
same.
lack of a second.
Did you second it?
She just
Sure.
said-
Oh, you seconded it? Oh, I'm
Sure.
sorry. I misunderstood what you
Yep.
said. All right, Manager Becker?
Hoping someone will amend it, but yeah.
Well, we've had a chance to discuss the various alternatives, and it just seemed to me that it would be an opportune time to see if there's been any change in sentiment about where to proceed with this permit. The reconsideration of the prior motion keeps intact the instruction to put together a memorandum of understanding.
Manager Miller?
You, it's my understanding that if you voted in the negative, you can't move to reconsider, is that correct?
Prevailing side.
The prevailing side.
Huh?
He voted on the prevailing side.
Oh, we lost, okay, all right,
If you lost, you can't
okay,
move to reconsider.
all right, you prevail, okay. See, how do we How do we accomplish all this?
I don't know. Usually I have some clever idea because I can read
we're gonna be-
what the board's driving for, but I feel like we're we're continuing to eliminate options
You
here
better
for
come
how
up
to
with
move
one
forward.
pretty quick because we're gonna review your farms.
That fact was never lost on me. Through the So,
I guess we're doing it in open session.
right. Maybe I'll see you guys tomorrow. First of all, I think everybody's tracking that the hardship here and the inability to meet the standard was essentially created by misapplication of the rules in the past. That the project that's being put forward today is incrementally, it reduces rates and reduces pollutant loading. It's better than current conditions. And so what we're talking about is how do we claw back and achieve a level of load and volume reduction that should have happened years ago because of how the rules were applied.
And how do we make sure there's no surprise in the future?
Right, so I'm just trying to build on what we do agree on. I don't know where this is going. It seems like we also, generally, there's an agreement that it's worth at least some level of time investment by the district in re-looking at and maybe representing a comprehensive analysis of how the sub-watershed works and looking at what the options are. We've heard from representatives from Lifetime that they've made an offer to contribute financially and are willing to continue participating with us. And short of saying, well, let's come back on August 9th with an agreement on what that number is and the district leading some sub-watershed analysis, and however that's linked to the variance or not is your decision. I'm not sure what your options are. I've heard we don't want to do pay to play. We don't want to approve the variance, so I'm not sure where to go. To me, the thing to do with the board is bring back more information, a more comprehensive plan that looks at how do you address this sub-watershed, which is, then becomes a big district priority for us to kind of study this area. Your other alternative is to push this back towards Lifetime and say that this is their issue to address, recognizing how the hardship was created. So between those two options of the district taking the sort of full burden or you pushing the full burden to Lifetime, the middle of the road option would be to consider how to advance the variance and work in some sort of more concrete partnership with Lifetime and their willingness to take the financial contribution and do a more in-depth study and bring the city into it and then present here's what the options are and here's how we can leverage their willingness to contribute to address the issue. That is a longer term level of effort than obviously their timeline for getting the work in the ground. So I'm just saying what everybody's discussed. Those are your three options: is push to Lifetime, take the burden yourself, or go in the middle in partnership, leverage their interest in being willing to partner financially. And if you go that route, you have to consider, are you willing to move the variance forward, and how do you condition the variance with this desire to partnership and do a more comprehensive study? But
Pause button.
that's where,
Thank you.
okay,
Pause
you're
button.
welcome.
I think in parliamentary terms, we just have where the motion to reconsider one was non-debatable motions, right?
Right,
And I
well,
haven't had a vote on it.
so you need to vote about whether to consider the motion, and then there's a couple other framework things that
Okay.
might be helpful, just to give you some, wayposts about
Okay,
how to
so a
make
vote
progress.
first. All those in favor of the motion to reconsider, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Mr. Welch, what did you want to add?
Just a couple of things to piggyback on what Mr. Whiskers just described. That the MOU is sent off as direction to develop. There's nothing for you to approve. It really doesn't do anything unless it comes back to you to be approved and to authorize the president to execute it. And the more you can give staff and council and the engineer, whoever that you want to see in that, the better, the closer we can get to the mark when we come back. And it seems to me that in terms of a more concrete framework like that James has described, is that it would lead to a cooperative agreement that would have very likely the Lifetime, if you wish, but certainly the city and the watershed as members cooperating under a more The MOU, I agree with Manager Loftus. It says we're going to go out and try something. It's not a very rigid legal document, but it could lead to the development of a cooperative agreement, and this watershed has done that many times.
Thank you. Mr. Whisker?
I know this isn't ideal for the applicant, but I think what I've heard is it's within our rights and within timeline that we have another 60 days, and we have another meeting on August 9th, and unless you want to iron out August 9th or 8th, unless you want to iron out every detail here, if there's interest at least in developing a cooperative agreement, the thing to do to me is, instead of having a vague MOU, is to direct staff to go back and develop terms and bring those terms back for consideration and reconsideration of the variance. So you've got more specifics on how we might actually structure a partnership. I can have more dialogue with the city, and we can bring back, here's the scope of investigation, here's what it would cost, here's how we'd structure it. You can look at the variance, we can repackage some of the technical information, and we can have a discussion with Lifetime on some of these terms. And then you've got more specifics to consider rather than trying to engineer them tonight.
I withdraw my second of the motion, and I'd like to move to table this till the August 9th meeting so that our staff can sit down with staff from Lifetime Fitness and the City of St. Louis Park to achieve what the district administrator just offered.
Was that parliamentary procedure
Well,
correct?
I took the second, Madam President, to be from Manager Loftus, so you can't
The second was
withdraw.
the motion to reconsider.
We're back at the original motion.
Right, and that's on.
I made the second of Manager Olson's initial motion,
But that,
which failed.
the group, that motion is, the board has that motion now.
So I move to table this until the
But
August
you
9th
can move
meeting.
to table.
My motion to table still stands for the
Yeah.
same reasons and purposes
The
with the outcomes as defined by the administrator.
And if the original seconder seconds your motion, are we okay?
Is there a second to
I'll second it.
Manager Becker? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
I like your middle ground option.
Manager Olson?
Can I ask one quick question to James? We keep talking about this historic mistake, which led us to tonight. Is there a way that we can take the accumulated water from the, I'm throwing this out, accumulated water from the parking ramp, top deck, funnel it through a filter, iron filter?
That's what we'll look at. We'll add that to our list.
Because that fixes the old problem before it runs into wherever it goes.
Yeah, I think what I've heard or what I've said, and it seems like there's support for, is we will look at a more comprehensive feasibility scope for the whole sub-watershed, and we will discuss with Lifetime the terms of how they might be willing to contribute. And we'll bring that information back and show you this is how we might be able to move forward.
Great.
And alongside that, you'll consider the variance.
Okay.
And we'll
Thank
do
you
that.
very much.
We'll try and do that on the 9th.
Thank you, thank you.
Did they approve tabling it?
We tabled
They
it,
did.
yes. We did
Okay.
vote. We did vote. Fair question. Item 11.1 is Resolution 18-071, approval of design for the Minnehaha Creek FEMA repairs project and authorization to solicit bids. Ms. Schaffler.
All right. Tonight I'm before you to kind of the last step before actually selecting a contractor is approving the final designs and authorizing staff to solicit bids for the Minnehaha Creek FEMA repair project. You've seen a lot of this before, so I'll just briefly walk you through it just to remind you of the work that's going to be done, and then at the end there is a little bit of refined cost estimate to that. So there are 11 projects. They're clustered around Minnehaha Falls and around the 35W corridor. 8 of the projects are below Minnehaha Falls, and I'll just quickly walk through what those are. 3 of them are pretty simple trail repair, bringing in some more crushed rock and adding some edging around a bridge abutment that's pictured on the right. 2 other projects involve a little bit more in-depth repair work to the stream bank that you see is eroded pretty severely on the right here, and on the left, one of the pillars of the boardwalk there is actually floating, so it'll be recreating and stabilizing the bank there with bioengineering. And here's a picture of what that looks like in different places along Minnehaha Creek. So that's what both those repairs are intended to do: add riprap and then bioengineering above the riprap.
Will that impede the flow of water out of the, isn't that a black ash seep?
Manager Shackleton, these two spots, it
On the
will,
left, sorry.
yeah, on the left, it'll just keep the channel flowing through.
But the black ash seep comes from the right, river right, and goes towards the...
Manager Shackleton, it'll be put at grade at what its existing grade is, so
It won't impound the water?
Yeah.
But it'll continue to move further.
Thank you.
And then there's 3 more repairs. The one on the left picture is of riprap that had washed away that the district had put in place above the core's footings, so we're just replacing that. The middle picture is just upstream of the wading pool area. As the high water kind of circled in this area, eroded the riprap and some of the soil there, so we're proposing to re-riprap that, but also build in some thoughtful stepping stones, because a lot of people use that area down there in our observation of the use. And then the picture on the right, as you can see, some of that limestone slab just settled, so it's digging that up to the scour depth and then rebuilding up that limestone slab.
Is that pipe in the middle? I know the park board is examining the deer pen and daylighting one of the pipes that comes down the middle of it.
So Manager Shackleton, the Watershed District actually did that study to daylight that
Yep,
big
I know.
pipe that comes in.
But they're examining it. I thought they were currently examining it.
We are currently examining it with them, but it's not that little one, it's the big one that comes
Okay. They're demonstrating.
in where that kind of concrete seating area is.
Thank you.
The last 3 projects are near the 35W corridor. The picture on the far left is, again, bank erosion, and this is just below this Lyndale boardwalk that the park board is currently has sought bids to do and is reviewing the bids of those work. And in talks with them, it does sound like we'll be able to use the same contractor to do that work in parallel and match up with them. The middle work is some bank erosion from the top of the road. So again, they're bringing in some riprap and live staking. And then the picture on the far right is some erosion downstream of a WPA wall. And here's again a couple of pictures of some other work we've done on the creek. The picture on the right is not the creek, but the picture on the left is of the creek, of where we're bringing riprap and then building some soil lifts above that and using natural vegetation to help stabilize the bank. I just want to remind the board again that we have, when I reviewed the preliminary designs with you, we discussed that we were proposing to defer these 2 WPA wall sites because in talks with the park board, they wanted to let the master plan process play out with that and then address what's best to do with these sites. And with that deferral, there is a big cost savings to the district. By not designing those or doing construction, it's about $500,000 that we're saving at the time. So the estimated construction cost for the 11 projects that we just walked through is around $300,000. And the FEMA grant for those is approximately $173,000, so the district's cost for construction ends up being around $127,000. The project was originally ordered for $1.2. That took into consideration a bunch of contingencies and doing those WPA wall sites. So we're currently tracking closer to $700,000, which puts us around $500,000 under that original estimated order project cost.
Out of order.
This is my last slide. So just project schedule. Tonight, seeking board approval of final design and authorization to solicit bids. And then we would solicit bids in October August, and then actually select a contractor in September, and then give the contractor a large construction window in hopes of getting better bids and giving them a bigger opportunity to work with variable creek flows and get the work done ahead of June of next year. And with that, I can take any questions. And just remind the board seeking final approval of designs and authorization to solicit bids.
Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18071?
So moved.
Manager Rogers, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Becker. Manager Shackleton.
Could you go back like 3 or 4 slides, please?
Yeah. This one, or the
Nope,
cost?
One more. I guess that's the one. When we're hard armoring the creek, do we put in VRSS?
Sorry, Manager Shackleton, can you repeat?
When we put in riprap, do we put in VRSS?
Manager Shackleton, yeah, so the VRS is a different term for bioengineering. So that's where we're planning to, so everywhere we're doing riprap, we're planning to do those soil lifts with the live stakes above it.
Okay. Above it or within it?
Depending on the profile of the creek and where it is on elevation potentially in it, but generally above it, with creek flows.
Okay.
It's usually-
Why is that? Yeah, I'm just curious.
So on a creek system, your riprap's acting as that main structure in place that's taking on the high flows and is often inundated. And then the vegetation is allowed to grow up above it. So it can handle brief inundation, but you're looking for your main toe boulders to be that kind of constant protection and barrier of the creek flow. And then Chris, maybe.
Manager Shackleton, whether you're using toe boulders along the creek section, it's just due to the velocities that they have along there. If the velocities are slow enough, they'll start to use the VRSS, so the soil lifts. So once you get high enough in the water profile, that's when they'll start to use VRSS. So that bottom bank is where they look to use the toe.
Yeah, that one. Thank you. I understand what you're saying, but that strikes me as just hard armoring. And in my mind, I'm envisioning like the section down by Cedar Avenue where there are willows that were. I remember the stakes were put into the riprap as well as
from
above.
that section.
So managers, what might be a little deceiving with that second picture is that with the hard armoring will come the live stakes in between. The VRSSs, in this case, the soil components above it. And so the combination of the two, it won't quite have as stark of a look as the hard armoring has right there. The hard armoring is also to that, this is actually down in the glen. So based on the water surface elevations that come up and down within that area, that's why it looks a little barren right there, because this is at a dry point within the creek. And so it will not be.
This just looks like the thing we don't want people to do
I
elsewhere.
It absolutely is. So yes, this is an instance where it was just really low in the creek.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from Ms. Schaffler? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Resolution 18-072, approval of the Edina Local Water Management Plan. Ms. Clark.
Manager's staff is requesting approval tonight of the City of Edina Local Water Management Plan, followed by the approval of the City of Excelsior Local Water Management Plan. At the June 28th Planning and Policy Committee, I provided an overview of the review process and framework of local water management plans and how those would be coming before the board. So tonight I'll provide a full description of the background and review that process, and then provide an abbreviated report for the Excelsior Local Water Management Plan to follow. So I'll cover some of the background that was provided at the Planning and Policy Committee, and then discuss the specific merits of each local water management plan. So two overarching points here is that local water management plans are required by city under statute for cities to create, and the district is authorized to approve those local plans. And then secondly, the local water management plan is one of the key elements in the district's balanced urban ecology program to influence local policy, to set a framework for integrated land use and water planning, and then setting expectations for district involvement in each community of opportunities they identify in the plan, and then through implementation of their coordination plans. So I'll quickly overview the district's strategy and approach, local water management plan requirements, and the role of those plans. So again, the district has authority to approve local water management plans, and they must satisfy technical requirements in statute and Minnesota rules, and then the requirements of the watershed district's management plan. Those all requirements are all defined in Appendix A of our water management plan, and were on our website and provided to the board in June. The goal, again, through the review process is to integrate these plans with our strategic goals, and then reinforce the district's balanced urban ecology approach, not only through the local water management plan review, but through the opportunity to review city comprehensive plans. Local water management plans are a required component of comprehensive plans, which cities are currently working on right now. The district has the opportunity to review those plans, but not approve them. So in our review of those plans, we will again look to reinforce the district's balanced urban ecology strategy. Again, the balanced urban ecology strategy is how the district is aimed to achieve its strategic goals of water quality, water quantity, ecological integrity, and thriving communities. Really recognize the importance of natural systems in achieving a high-quality built environment. Implementation of this policy operates under the guiding principles of focus, flexibility, and partnership. The approach to make these lasting improvements on the landscape is implementing capital projects with our partners, integrated with non-water investments, and then changing the land use water policy environment to promote better integration of these planning spheres to lead to better implementation of these non-water and natural resource projects. Through the recently adopted plan, the district reflected on lessons learned and communicated that as a regional water planning agency, we will focus in areas of highest resource need to achieve measurable results to cleaning our waters. The areas of focus in our plan are the 6 Mile Creek Sub-Watershed and the Painter Creek Sub-Watershed, which is our strategy for the upper watershed in Lake Minnetonka, addressing the 2 most polluted bays on Lake Minnetonka. Our strategy in the lower watershed is the lower portion of the Minnehaha Creek Sub-Watershed, where impacts are highest from land use change and opportunities to address historic impacts are highest as a result of land use change ongoing. The district said that while we're focusing our implementation efforts in these areas of high resource need, we will be responsive district-wide with our programming, implementation, and technical assistance. The district's participation and partnership projects district-wide is dependent on the alignment of opportunities with water resource needs, the early coordination of our partners to most effectively integrate water and non-water investments, and then district capacity. The role of the local water management plan in this plan cycle, juxtaposed to the previous round after our 2007 plan, is emphasizing less on technical requirements of load reductions and more on coordination and information sharing to integrate our water projects with land use change as it occurs. The specific LGU requirements, again, summarized here but were provided in June, include technical data, drainage area maps, land use maps, current and projected, flooding identification, inventories such as best management practices, owned, public and non-public. They require reference to existing water resource related agreements. They require a 10-year capital improvement plan. New to this cycle is information on land use planning processes, links and information about planning that's in the works, small area plans, information about existing development regulation and how that promotes early coordination of land use and water planning. The plan requires each LGU to indicate whether they want to assume any or all of the district's regulatory authority, and if they will choose to delegate or assume WACA authority, and then finally the coordination plan. Staff provided a robust review and detail with respect to all technical requirements to the cities, and met individually with both the cities of Edina and Excelsior, mostly just to discuss the requirement of the coordination plan and information sharing processes that we hope to solidify as part of this process. The Edina Local Water Management Plan, I'll cover for each city the location within the watershed, the major water bodies, the issues and management strategies identified in the district's plan and by the city, and then review the coordination plan and partnership opportunities. The city of Edina is located in the Minnehaha Creek Sub-Watershed, and the major water resource in the city of Edina is Minnehaha Creek. Edina is partially within the Minnehaha Creek watershed district. This is a map about approximating the city of Edina boundaries, and this is that portion of Edina that's within Minnehaha Creek watershed district. The remainder is in 9 Mile Creek. The water resource issues within the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed are that Minnehaha Creek is impaired on the index of biological integrity and for chlorides. Localized flooding is also an issue in the subwatershed, and the city of Edina has paid particular attention to localized flooding within their local water management plan. There were approximately 80 small sites identified within the plan, along with a really detailed prioritization framework for how they would address each of those issues. Management strategies for the subwatershed are generally stormwater management, stream restoration, and wetland and riparian corridor restoration. At a high level, the city's management strategies particularly focused on flooding and somewhat on water quality with less detail, is finding opportunities similar to the district's model to achieve what they referred to as co-benefits of infrastructure and redevelopment projects within the city, integrating opportunities for addressing localized flooding and water with land use change. Specific opportunities, partnership opportunities that the city's identified in their plan are our current Arden Park partnership. The agreement in the plan is referenced. They've identified Weber Park as a opportunity, and also provided a letter in response to the district's recent distribution of its CIP. Grandview Green, also referred to in the city as the lid over Highway 100, is a partnership opportunity for that project. Staff has participated in as part of a sustainability panel, identifying sustainability goals for that project, which is essentially an assemblage of mostly public land over Highway 100 for redevelopment and development. And then the city of Edina also identified coordination of policies, and one to note there, which is something that the district has already started working with Edina on, is inspection and maintenance of BMPs, public and private BMPs through the plan, and staff has recognized as well there's a really lack of knowledge and understanding of all the private stormwater BMPs out there and their condition and who's maintaining them, and I think it is a broader policy issue, and the city has flagged that in their local water management plan. The highlights of their coordination plan include an annual meeting, early coordination, and notice of land use changes, including road improvements, small area plans, and their CIP. And again, that programmatic and policy coordination. The city also in their plan recognized the relational nature of the district and city's coordination on land use and water planning, and that the really effect of implementation of that type of planning is largely relational and can't be specifically called out and numerized in a coordination plan. But I think the idea with the district's emphasis on this coordination plan is, while a lot of those relational planning spheres exist with certain communities, it's to kind of bridge the relational nature and institutionalize the way of doing business. So that concludes the summary of Edina's local water management plan, and staff recommendation is approval.
Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Manager Miller?
What, was there anything included in this, in their plan that changes the, any requirements on single-family homes?
One issue that I did look for, stormwater management on single-family homes has been kind of a reoccurring question and issue, and the city has changed their policy or rules on that, where in some cases stormwater management is required now, which didn't always used to be the case.
And it took place on August 1st?
That requirement?
Yeah.
I don't know when it was enacted, but it's been a change that has happened since that issue was kind of flagged and raised some time ago.
Other questions? I forget if I've asked for a motion. Yes, I did.
You did.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On to Excelsior.
Manager, Madam President,
Yes.
and Renee can speak to this more. She's looked at Edina's plan as well, but to the last point about single-family home, the city is deferring to the, as it states in your resolution, to the watershed for regulation.
The city has not assumed any of the watershed district's regulation. The city does have their own regulation that in some cases is more restrictive than the watershed district's regulation, and that would be one of those cases.
The, well, I'll talk about it later. Go ahead.
We're on to another topic if you don't talk about it now.
No, that's fine.
All right. Resolution 18073.
Chair White, Board of Managers, the Excelsior Local Water Management Plan is requested for approval tonight as well. Excelsior is located in the Lake Minnetonka Sub-Watershed, highlighted here on your map. The entire city is within the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District and entirely drains to Lake Minnetonka, with a small portion draining through Galpin Lake first. Within the Lake Minnetonka watershed, there are 4 impaired bays: Halstead, Jennings, Stubbs, and West Arm. And within the city's local water management plan, they've identified some localized flooding issues as problems at various places in Excelsior. Management strategies defined in our plan in the Lake Minnetonka subwatershed include wetland restoration, stormwater management, carp management, and turtle sediment and phosphorus control, and then restoration of upstream water bodies. These management strategies are being focused in the 6 Mile Creek Halstead Bay subwatershed, and will be focused in the Inner Creek subwatershed. In the city of Excelsior, the district is committed to being responsive with technical assistance, regulatory assistance and capital investments, initiated and led by city coordination on project opportunities. There is a current memorandum of understanding from, I believe, 2013 that the plan does reference for downtown stormwater management, and the city has identified that in their plan. The city has also emphasized the request for district involvement in the Excelsior Commons Park plan. And here I'd like to note for the approval of this plan, the city has expressly requested grant funding when such a program is available for work in the Excelsior Commons and for downtown stormwater management. Through the approval of these plans and the coordination plan, the communication while we're approving the plan, the district is continuing to reinforce and emphasize that opportunities for access to district resources, including technical assistance and funding, come through early coordination at the concept level. The district hasn't been involved in concept planning in Excelsior Commons so far, but as opportunities get explored further and developed, staff through this process has communicated that early coordination on how we could potentially be involved would be required. So I'd like to note that. The coordination plan is provided again in your packet. The highlights include annual meetings and then early notice of land use changes on infrastructure plans and permits. And for, again, the approval of local water management plans also includes express approval of these coordination plans, which just emphasizes for the district and our communities the importance of these plans in our goals to integrate land use and water planning. That concludes my recommendation.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18073?
So moved.
Manager Rognus, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Shackleton, any discussion or questions from Ms. Clark? Manager Olson?
I find it curious that you listed Halstead's, Harrison, Jennings, and Stubbs Bay. They're about the farthest away from Excelsior you can get geographically.
Sure.
And that's just because they're part of that lake. Is that?
Sure. So to clarify, as taking a regional picture at addressing water resources, Excelsior drains to Lake Minnetonka, which is a big regional resource. Mm-hmm. Excelsior drains to Lower Lake South or Excelsior Bay, which historically has a grade and doesn't have a really water resource need. Lake Minnetonka as a whole does. Mm-hmm. What the city does with the district or through their local water management plan doesn't address the overarching needs in Lake Minnetonka as a whole. So with each of these plans, I'll highlight what we've identified in our plan in that sub-watershed and for those primary resources.
Thanks.
What is the condition of Gulpin? Is that?
There isn't a lake grade for Gulpin,
Mm-hmm.
which is
But it's not on the impaired waters list? Or?
not that I'm aware of.
All right, thank you. Anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Resolution 18074, awarding a contract for demolition of facilities at 325 Lake Road. Michael Hayman.
Good evening, Chair White and managers. Excuse me, I'm before you this evening with a recommendation to award the contract for demolition of facilities at 325 Blake Road. To give you a little bit of an outline on what we'll be covering, I'll briefly walk through what the plans were for the project for the demolition, just to cover some of the bid alternates. There were a variety of those that you will have seen in your packet, and then talk through the responses we received through the bid process, what the low responsive bid recommendation is, and then further lay out the schedule and timeline and some next steps for the board. So as you'll likely recall, the plan was the plan as presented in the bid was the base bid being the northwest portion of the building to come down first. Alternate bids were provided to take down the remainder of the facility as alternate bid 1, and then 3 alternates for what we would do with the concrete and asphalt from the parking and floor area of the building. So whether we would stockpile the rubble, whether we would crush the rubble as Class 5, or whether we'd be required to haul rubble and dispose of it off-site. And that also relates to the previous contract that we signed to clean the floors. You may recall that the haul off-site was projected to be significantly more expensive, so we cleaned any mercury residue and heavy metal residue off the floors, and have reports that those are now reusable for on-site. So the bid process, we were open for approximately 3 weeks, which is relatively standard. We did have really great response at the 2 mandatory pre-bid meetings, and so we had a pretty strong indication that there were a variety of interested primes that would be coming in through the bid process. We did receive 5 bids, and as you would have noted in your packet, you'll see on the screen in front of you, the range was rather wide, nearly 100% from the low bid to the high bid. There's a variety of factors that go into that, but we did have approximately two bids that were at or under the bid, projected bid estimate from the engineer's opinion of probable cost. Before you this evening, the recommendation is to award the total base bid plus alternate bid 1 and bid 3, which would be to crush and stockpile as Class 5 on site. The low bid recommendation is Vite and Company. Their bid was found to be responsive, as well as all the work experience statements of their team and their sub-consultants or subcontractors, including asbestos abatement, licensing, safety for fencing, etc. The base bid, as I noted, plus the 2 bid alternates with the Vite proposal comes in at $1,468,575, and we did talk with Crouse Anderson in terms of their preference from a stockpile crushing and some of the savings that would be associated with that. There's obviously a cost savings for the district for the material to remain on site regardless of the condition that Crouse Anderson wants that in. It's a little bit more expensive than leaving it as just a stockpile of rubble, but both instances are savings for the district. Some of the budget considerations, the projected cost of the opinion of probable cost was just shy of $1.8 million. That's just hard cost for demolition. There's no soft costs associated in that projection, so that didn't include design, plans, and specs, or the oversight. And you may recall we had parsed out the soft costs, and I'll get into this a little bit more in the next slide, due to not knowing exactly what we would be demoing at what time. I should note, big thanks to Chris and the Wang team, we came in about $15,000 under budget on the plans and specifications, so the team was really diligent in terms of working it all the way through bid, and that contract is essentially complete at this point. So we do have funding sources, outside funding sources, and we had projected needing in that $1.8 to $2 million. There's $500,000 from the Hennepin TOD fund, $805,000 from the seed grant, and then there are the right-of-way acquisition funds as well that we had projected needing for this project, which will work to fill the gap and account for that 25% match. So related to schedule, if the board authorizes the bid tonight, we will actually issue the notice of award tomorrow, because we are working on a very tight timeline. And I've already been in contact with Vite that this item would be before the board this evening. By August 9th, we'd have our pre-construction as well as the notice to proceed, and then would be on site and initiating demolition by August 13th. And then it's sort of flexible beyond the base bid, which is the corner of the building at Blake Road that needs to come down. There's some flexibility on their ability to finish the site by the end of the year. So regarding construction oversight, I just wanted to note that we are now finishing developing that scope and what it all entails in terms of construction oversight from our end. We wanted to wait until we saw bids come in and knew exactly what we would be overseeing from an asbestos standpoint in particular, because there are requirements of the grant funds, in particular with the asbestos, that require particular air monitoring and making sure that the non-friable asbestos doesn't become friable. And so most of those, I should note that most of those expenses for that oversight is grant reimbursable, but that will be rolled into that contract for oversight. And we will bring that back before the board on August 9th prior to initiating demolition the following week. So with that, Resolution 18074's authorization to award the contract. It also authorizes the administrator to issue the notice of award, execute the construction agreement, issue the notice to proceed, and then execute any change orders that are required up to that not to exceed amount of $1,615,423. So with that, I would take any questions.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18074?
Second.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions for Mr. Heyman? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Great.
Nice work.
Thank you. Start smashing.
You gonna ride that wrecking ball?
Well, I think a lot of it will have to come down in sections.
Yeah.
Resolution 18075, authorization to reimburse City of Warren for the Castle Point Shoreline Improvement Project. Mike. It's loading.
So President White, managers, I'm here tonight before you with a request to authorize the reimbursement for the City of Orono for the Casco Point Shoreline project. And this is a project that has been a long time in the making, so we are here tonight with an overview of the project and the history, the project elements, the timeline of this project, the costs, and then staff's recommendation. So to familiarize yourself with the site location, it is on Casco Point, which is in the city of Orono on Carmen Bay. Another view here is this schematic, which highlights in orange the project site. You may be familiar with this from a permit application that came forward in May that the Board of Managers approved for a subdivision on this parcel. There were 3 parcels being subdivided into 2 single-family homes. And at that time, it was explained to the Board of Managers that this shoreline improvement here is within the buffer of the shoreline, of the home development, and so that it is continuing to be maintained. The city has a permanent maintenance declaration and has affirmed its intent to maintain this shoreline restoration project in perpetuity. So the issue with this area, the City of Orono came to the Watershed District in 2010 with concerns about erosion. The shoreline had receded up to 10 feet with losing approximately 1,800 square feet of land, exposing a sanitary sewer line that was near the surface, and there was concern about the integrity of that sewer line. There's a couple of pictures there of what it looked like back in 2010, exposing that sewer line and showing how the manhole is quite protruding above the surface of the land there. So the project elements proposed by the City of Orono was to restore the shoreline and cover the sanitary sewer line, stabilize the shoreline with rock, compost grouting, and native plantings, remove the buckthorn in the upland area, and restore with native plants and create a native buffer of 15 to 20 feet. And the estimated cost of this project was $69,000. And this estimated cost was what was used by the Watershed District to estimate the cost share. for this project. So these are in your packet and in the cost share agreement, but thought I'd just quickly review the designs for the Shoreline Improvement Project at Casco Point. This is the base plan showing the ordinary high water level and the erosion control plan there. This is a cross-section that shows the location of the floating silt curtain as well as the toe boulders and the compost grouting, which house the native plants there. There's a fiber roll that is in place, and then the buffer plantings on the upland area of that project site. And finally, this is an aerial view of the project. On the bottom part of the plan is, again, those toe boulders with the grout, with the compost grout and the native plantings within them, and then the upland zone with the buffer plantings. So this is what it looked like in 2012, just to ground yourself from the plans to the actual site, what it looked like. You can see the silt curtain in the water, and then you can see the toe boulders and the fiber roll, and then the upland area with where the plantings were installed. And the left side is looking north toward the lake, and the right side is looking south. So the project timeline in April of 2011, the board approved funding of 50% of total eligible costs not to exceed $34,500. In April of 2013, a funding agreement was fully executed by the district, which stipulated a reimbursement of $34,500 of documented construction costs. So you see there's a bit of a discrepancy there in the funding stipulation from the RBA and the agreement. So that is one of the reasons why we're here before you tonight with this request. In June of 2017, the city engineer certified the project complete, and that certification letter is included in your packet. In December of 2017, the city submitted a reimbursement request to the district. In April of 2018, the funding agreement expired before the watershed staff was able to collect all of the information that it needed to process the reimbursement. And then in June of 2018, the watershed district staff conducted an inspection, and we have since received all the documentation we need, which is included in your packet tonight. So just walking you through what it looks like from then to now. In 2013, you can see the plantings are starting to become more established. After 2013, you might remember there was a devastating flood in the watershed district and the region, Lake Minnetonka reaching a historic high level. So in 2015, the project site shows the signs of that flooding, and it delayed the establishment of the plantings. So this is what it looked like in 2015. But in June of 2018, staff found the site well vegetated with minimal weed issues. There was some presence of garlic mustard, Canada thistle, and reed canary grass noted, and the district provided the city with treatment recommendations. Some beaver or muskrat activity also was noted as well there. And as I noted, the city has provided all of the required documentation for reimbursement, including the documentation of costs. And this is a little more simplified breakdown of the costs that were provided to us. And they are typical for shoreline restoration. You will see that the total is $68,597.58, which is about $400 less than the $69,000 they had estimated, and which was the base of our cost share calculation. So at 50% cost share, authorized by the resolution that was approved in 2011, the reimbursement would be $34,298.79, which is about $201.21 short of the amount that would be authorized in the agreement, $34,500.
It's not short, it's less.
Less than. Thank you, Manager Wilson. So the recommendation, given the following factors, the project was installed as designed, is well vegetated with minimal weed issues. All required documentation has been received by the district. The city has affirmed its plans to maintain the property in perpetuity in accordance with the maintenance declaration that's on the property. There is a discrepancy between the funding resolution and the agreement, which results in that $201 payment differential. And the district was not able to collect all the information prior to expiration of the funding agreement. We are recommending, or staff is recommending authorization to reimburse the city of Orono $34,500 for the Casco Point Shoreline Improvement Project.
Move approval.
The motion, is there a second?
Second.
Second. Any discussion or questions? We all know there's a little snow in April.
There was.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Have you been down there to see it?
Oh, yes, it looks wonderful,
That's it.
yeah.
Bushley Road, as of this week, looks tremendous.
Oh, I haven't been there.
The riprap is becoming very natural, looking like it's been there forever.
I'll have to check that out. The next thing then would be the president's report, going back to, whoops, in the wrong place. Okay, so, board retreat. We have, in agenda setting meetings, we discussed a variety of topics that we could bring up for a discussion at a board retreat. And basically they're about clearly defining the roles and responsibilities and information flow between the staff, the administrator, and the board. And so we could talk about our governance policies. Are there any policies that are missing? Do we need to think more about how the board and staff work collaboratively? Board assignments. We all have different backgrounds, different professions, and we all have participated in various ways. And so talking about how to make sure that we keep the information flowing, keep those relationships and sort of special assignments coordinated, and then generally about how much information we're getting, our board packets, and we could talk about the structure of meetings too. Things like, do we want more consent items on the agenda, those kinds of things. And we could also do some brainstorming. We could do some idea generating about things that are coming up, the regulations, streamlining, CIP grant program, the flexible program, talking about some of the implementation for the Balanced Urban Ecology program, and others, perhaps placemaking. So those are that's a lot of stuff. And I would like to hear managers' thoughts on that or other things we might discuss at a retreat.
Do you have a candidate date?
No, I don't. That we should talk about that too.
Okay. Because I was thinking that, maybe we would do a complete review of the work of KA on the,
At a retreat?
yeah. Depending on what your thoughts are about the timing.
I think it'll be sooner than that. They won't have started. You think in like the next 3 months?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're supposed to look at the governance policies every year, of course, but this would give us a particular focus of them also, and it'd be part of our strategic planning and implementing all the, having a new administrator, talking about the relationships. Well, hearing no objection, put together an agenda for that. What about time? This sounds like it could be a pretty, like 4 hours, 5 hours, not 3. Am I wrong?
It's a big list.
Yeah. Do you want to tackle it all at once? You want to cut it into smaller retreats? We do a 5-hour retreat? Like a Saturday?
Well, we could divide them up into short and long-term goals and address them accordingly.
address the short-term goals first? 2 retreats? One retreat?
I prefer breaking it up and do a Saturday thing.
Mhm. You prefer,
Breaking it up as opposed to doing a big Saturday.
okay, sure. Who wants to go to Saturday, right? Okay, well, if you have other thoughts, let us know, and we'll start putting together a retreat agenda, and then dates. Do you want to do Thursday nights because we have meetings then?
We've been picking the Thursday that's the 5th Thursday of the month.
We've already had 2 of those. I wonder if we have one coming up.
Yeah.
We do, in August 30th.
That would actually work for my schedule.
Is that right before Labor Day?
Labor Day is early this year.
It is.
The 3rd. It's also State Fair. How important is that? I think so.
Did you bake me bread?
He doesn't know yet. Hasn't decided. What we could do is, since the 30th doesn't work for you, Manager Loftus, maybe we can just put together a poll of dates and send them around.
I can do that.
Okay.
Okay.
Labor Day is the 3rd.
Yeah.
Important cabin time though, before the holiday. There'll be good traffic.
Yeah, you and everybody else.
All right, well then, I'll ask, Mr. Whisker said that he can
All
get
at the same
a
time.
date poll out to us and we can pick some times. All right, thanks very much. I'll turn it over to you, James, for your report.
Very good. I'll keep it brief because I really want to get to my review after Manager Miller's earlier comments. We have a couple media updates. Want to keep the information flowing to the board on when we're in the media or when we're pushing messaging out externally. MinPost recently featured the district's work in 6 Mile as an example of the work Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council traditionally funds, as sort of a second piece to the article about a critique of using portions of those funds to pay off state debt. So it was interesting sort of dichotomy there in the article, and I can send it around if people haven't seen it. Also, Channel 4 reached out. This was building on the work of Mr. Jabor for the boat standards for AS prevention, and they were looking for comment from the district on the new guidelines for boat design. So we were able to partner up with Gabe on that, provide some good comments. Darren led, and I think I provided a report on this previously, I can hand this out, that we work in the Target Corporation. We've gone out and done a creek cleanup of Minnehaha Preserve. There's just some pictures here. They got a full tour and kind of briefing on our work at the preserve, and then they cleaned out a bunch of vegetation and freed up access to some of the canoe launches out there. You heard about this earlier, but Elizabeth and Becky are working on permit comments to the PCA construction stormwater permit, and that was released on the 25th. PCA incorporated our comments, so the strict prohibition on infiltration, they modified that so that the restrictions are only inside the wellhead protection zones, which is something that we'd wanted to see and something that Minneapolis and other cities had wanted to see, so that was a good outcome for us with the Pollution Control Agency. And Tiffany's provided me with a little bit of a water level update here, and that's something that we want to also keep the information moving on to the board and the public, given our efforts with National Weather Service and concerns downstream and upstream as we get periodic rainfall events. And I think where we are right now is we've had a little bit of dry weather despite the rain today, and that's allowed for a little bit of relief on water levels across the district. Looking in South Minneapolis, the Nokomis Lake level down there is currently at 815.2. It's just 2 inches away from runout elevation of the weir, which is 815.1. And Tiffany's been, I think, going above and beyond working with the park board. They're coordinating about twice a week on identifying opportunities to open the weir, close the weir as part of that management plan, and that's good that we've gotten the water level down and within a tolerance for the folks that live around the lake there. The weir is currently open. I think we're going to keep it open through, you'd said early next week, because that's kind of how long the dry weather is predicted. For the lake itself, the water level is currently at 929.3, which is right about where we want it for the end of July. We've got some flexibility. And we've got dry weather again predicted in the forecast, so we'll be dropping the dam discharge to around 20 CFS. So people expect to see that in a couple days downstream. It's about how long it takes to see the impact of that. I've got a very draft mock-up of the mid-year highlights here that Communication Department's been working on. I was a little bit reticent to hand these out because it's the first one with my mug shot on the front. I'm not a big fan of that. One of the things I've been talking to Telly about is getting the board involved in sort of the regular flow of our external publications. So rather than you getting those when they're done, we're not looking for full copy edit or anything like that, but getting you informed when they're about to come out a couple months ahead of time. What's the rhythm of those major communications, our mid-year, our budget, our end of year? What are some of the key messages and themes? So the board can provide some comment on those early on and feel comfortable when those are released. That one's kind of taped up, mocked up, because it gets printed externally. So that's going to be going out the next couple weeks for final production. President White had mentioned, is there a question on that? President White had mentioned we had a meeting last Friday, her and I, with Hennepin County Commissioner Peter McLaughlin and State Representative Gene Woodenius. And we answered some questions on Nokomis groundwater. I think you've seen the letter, so we I think effectively responded to why there's been high groundwater around Lake Nokomis. Obviously, the area is a product of the history of development and topography. So homes out there are naturally in proximity to groundwater. We've had 4 years of record precipitation. When that precipitation's occurred has happened when the ground hasn't been frozen and we haven't had vegetation on the ground. So some of the Met Council modeling shown that there's been higher than average levels of groundwater recharge, about 4 increases of groundwater recharge year over year. And so groundwater levels have come up, and that's really kind of the principal drivers. There are some questions about how the creek's involved or how Lake Nokomis is involved in groundwater issues down there. And one of the things that we've been pointing out is the creek and Nokomis are about 10 to 30 feet below some of the homes that are experiencing groundwater issues. So they're not really a principal driver in backing water up, so to speak, into the area. We also answered questions, and I think Manager Shackleton brought this to light regarding how the creek interacts with Lake Hiawatha with their groundwater issues and the pumping of groundwater there to maintain the golf course. And there were some questions regarding our involvement in the decision making that was coming up for the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board's consideration of pumping regimes for the Hiawatha Golf Course. So we circled back, framed that in the letter. Happy to answer any questions you might have about that. Otherwise, I think that's fairly self-explanatory. And the only other meeting that I've got coming up that's kind of in that vein is Manager Olson and I have scheduled one of our routine sort of quarterly check-ins with Carver County Commissioner Malushnik, giving him an update on some of our work in the 6 Mile Halstead Bay, Sub-Watershed, the carp work, Wasserman West. We'll also be talking about this concept of convening partners and talking about more of a regional approach to education, engagement, awareness, placemaking, those sorts of things. So we're meeting, I think, on August 6th.
At 2 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
Wow.
That's what I have, unless there's other questions.
Anything for Mr. Whisker? All right, then, I need a motion to go into closed session for the interview of Gene Whisker. Is there a motion to go into closed session? And the office, is there a second? Manager Shackleton, those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Who are these folks? Target employees?
Target employees.